Okay,
Okay.
Counselor.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So hello, everybody. We are calling to order the January 20th meeting of the Quality of Life Committee. Just pulling up my agenda. I've had a little bit of technical difficulty. But if we could get a roll call while my agenda pulls up, that'd be great.
Okay, Councillor Cassett Sanchez.
Present.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Here.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Present.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
I am here. Sounds like we're all here, so that's great. Welcome, everyone. Happy day. Happy inauguration day. Woohoo. And want to move to approval of the agenda. Are there changes from staff on the agenda?
No changes tonight.
Okay, and any changes from the committee? And if not, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move for approval.
Second.
Great. We have a motion by Councillor Rivera, a second by Councillor Cassett Sanchez. If we could call the roll on the approval of the agenda, please, Jennifer.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right. We'll move then to the approval of the consent agenda. Are there items that the committee would like to pull from the consent agenda?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councillor Garcia.
I'd like to pull item A as an apple, please.
Okay. Councillor Rivera, did you have something you wanted to pull?
Same, item A.
Okay. All right. So with
Madam
that,
Chair?
I'm sorry, Councillor Villarreal.
Could you add, let's see, item C? I just have some minor amendments to consider. Thanks.
Great. So with that, can we get a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, let's see. Councillor Garcia, did I hear you make the motion, and then Councillor Rivera was the second?
Yeah, that's fine. Or Councillor
Okay.
Cassett Sanchez, I think.
I know it was one of those photo finishes. Okay, Jennifer, if we could have a roll call on the approval of the consent agenda.
Excuse me, Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, and then that takes us to approval of the minutes. Are there changes from staff to the minutes?
No changes to the minutes.
Okay, any changes from the committee? If not, is there a motion?
Move for approval.
All right, we have a motion by Councillor Rivera, second by Councillor Cassett Sanchez. If we could take the roll one more time on approval of the minutes.
Sure. Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. Okay, so with that, we will go to the consent agenda. And we have two items from the consent agenda to consider tonight. The first one is number 6A, request for approval of an agreement between the City of Santa Fe and American Traffic Solutions, Inc. Let's see. I'm sorry, who did pull this? Councillor Rivera, was that you? Or Councillor Garcia? Maybe you both did.
Councillor Garcia was first.
Okay, Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I've got some questions for our police force team, so I don't know if they're on with us.
I think they are.
I think I see Deputy Chief Valdez. All right.
Yes,
Hey.
he is here.
Good evening, Deputy Chief. How are you? Couple quick questions for you. I know that it's mentioned that the state does not allow these speed cameras to be on state roads such as Cerritos and St. Francis and St. Michael's. Can we get clarification why they don't allow that if they're going to be taking 50% of the revenue generated from these fines? Why aren't they not allowing them on state roads?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that was a NMAC rule that was passed, I believe, back in 2010 that prohibited the deployment of these devices on state maintained roads. So I believe it's the New Mexico Department of Transportation. They had a committee and they instituted that NMAC rule. And they also required that we have to pay 50% of the fines that are collected to the state, although these devices are not to be deployed on the state road. So any other road that is utilized to be for speed enforcement, that 50% would go. So I think that's something that because I see it as a big portion, considering we have several main roads through our jurisdiction that would certainly benefit from this type of device. But I think that would be at a higher level than where I'm at to make that consideration known to that committee.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification, Deputy Chief. So if I'm understanding correctly, if we went and appealed to the Department of Transportation's board that made this rule, they might be able to rescind it to allow devices? Just because the question is, the reasoning and justification is, I see that's where a lot of speeding is done, in particular late at night. You know, I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I see people racing into town, folks that are commuting into the city because there's no presence. And in particular, you know, St. Francis, right around Siringo area, I see people blowing by 60, 70 miles per hour sometimes. And if we can minimize that with some of these potential deployment of these speed cameras, I think that would help. I just didn't understand why we couldn't deploy them if we've used the roads for other instances, like when we implemented the signs that say don't donate to panhandlers, donate to a local charity and such. So I didn't know what the justification was. So thank you for that clarification, Deputy Chief.
Councilor Garcia, if I can.
Sure, absolutely.
It's actually state law, so it would need a legislative change to do that. And I believe, I can't remember what year it was passed, but we can certainly get that information.
Okay, thank you, Councilor, for that clarification. In regards to the breakdown, Deputy Chief, why is it so skewed? Why, if these are being utilized on our city streets, I can understand, you know, the company that we're potentially going into contract with wanting their cut 40%, but for the city to get 10%, did we negotiate that? How did we arrive at 10%?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that portion that they get, that 40%, that covers all expenses for them to operate the camera devices. Pretty much they'll be managing everything aside from us doing the validation of the citations. That would also include any collections that come up. So if someone is in default and they have to go to collections and recover that, for the $50 fine, it'll cover that, and there will be I believe $2 that will come back to the city with that for a $50 fine. If it's a $100 fine, we would owe the company $2.50 for those collections. And but that's for just the whole management of the program. They do the maintenance on the equipment, deployment of the equipment. They'll be deploying the signs for us as well. Anything needs to be done with the equipment, they're going to take care of that. Our role is going to be to validate the violations. So they can then be sent out as notices of a violation, and they'll be responsible for collecting and getting the funds deposited into our account. Once it goes full circle, then they send us an invoice, and then we are billed for that service, and that's when we settle the amount due at that 40% per violation for services rendered.
Okay, and how did we arrive at 50% for the state? If a lot of the work is going to be done by either the company or the city, how does the state come into play, especially when they're going to be taking 50% of the revenues generated?
Councilor Garcia, again, that's that NMAC rule that is imposed on us by the state, where they say they get 50% of the amount collected from violations for speed devices that are deployed on the roads.
Okay. And I guess the last follow-up in regards to the breakdown, is 10% even going to cover our costs? Are we going to be operating in the red? I know that you said if it hits $100 fine, we're going to pay $250. So is this ultimately going to cost us resources and we're going to just kind of be out of pocket? And I don't see the benefit in that sense.
Councilor Garcia, so until the services are rendered and it goes full circle, that's when the amount will be due. If we have a ton of violations in a school zone or construction zone where it is that $100 fee, and they go into default, then at that point, that would take money from the program to pay for it. But again, we're looking at this program being self-sufficient. It's going to be able to pay for, those issues that come up, such as that $2.50 due for those fines in default, if it does come to that. But that covers the whole collection process. It's a lot more cost effective than us having to go and contract with another company to do the collections on our end and make sure that that's completed. But our hope is that the program is going to be self-sufficient. That's how the previous program that we had was operated. And, with that, 10%, which equates to $5 per violation, we feel that that should be sufficient enough for us to operate the program. And again, we're not due to pay those services until it comes full circle and the person that has the notice sent to them for speeding pays the fine. We get the money deposited into our accounts, and then we get the invoice from the company to provide payment for services rendered. So again, this is not going to be something that's going to be a big revenue generator. The vast majority of the revenue that is going to be derived from this program is going to be for the operating expense of the program itself.
Okay, thank you. And I wasn't, in this sense, looking at it as a revenue generator. I want to make sure that it's not a revenue decreaser. We're not paying out of pocket for this when we technically have our skills with our police force to implement, speeders, and we can deploy them throughout the city, just like these speed cameras. I do want to echo some of the concerns that was brought up during the Finance Committee. I think it was in particular by Councilor Romero Worth in regards to the issue of this being looked at as a trial program. And we're kind of moved away from that and not implementing the 2 that was agreed upon, and it's 6. So I don't know if that we were talked into by the company, because obviously they're going to be generating more revenue. The more cameras they have on the ground, the more revenue they're going to be generating. And I think that to me is very concerning. They're ultimately trying to put more on the ground and make more money for themselves. And I would like for us to have that trial period to see where we go with this. And then in particular, if we can work with our colleagues with the state of New Mexico to get these potentially put on state roads, then maybe look at more, because I think that's where a lot of we see a lot of high speeders, at least in it. And I hear them, I see them, and I get a lot of concerns and complaints from constituents. With that, no other questions, Deputy Chief. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councilor Rivera, you also wanted to ask some questions, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Valdez, can you explain for those potentially watching? I get a lot of questions about why we don't put them at intersections. Can you address that for anyone that might be listening?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I'd actually like to go back to the vendor to see if there is the possibility to put them at an intersection, but these devices would be only for speed violations and not necessarily, red light violations. Once we kind of get into that realm, that's going to be kind of a different animal. But if we're speaking about the speed devices at the intersection, I can provide some information on that.
Yeah, so let me readdress my question or re-ask my question, but it is about red light cameras. So can you address why we are not able to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Currently, we do not have an ordinance that allows for the deployment of those red light camera devices. You know, the ordinance that's on the books right now only applies to photo speed enforcement cameras and not red light camera devices.
So Albuquerque had the red light camera devices, and I think they were deemed illegal. Are you aware of that, or is that part of the state rule or ordinance or regulations?
I haven't done much research on the red light cameras. Most everything I have is focused on the speed cameras. But I know that the red light cameras was one of the items that brought this issue to the state level for them to impose not only on the red light cameras, but also on speed cameras, that 50% share where municipalities or jurisdictions that operate them would have to pay that. But, you know, with those red light cameras, I have my own kind of concerns with them. You know, but as for it being illegal or unlawful, I think I have to do a bit more research on that and get you an answer.
Okay, thank you. Now you said, did you say regarding the $100 fine that if that were to be assigned, I guess, to a driver, that we're paying $2.50 at the end of all that?
Councilor Rivera, that's only if it goes into default and if you have to go to collections. So that would include the cost of conducting the collection of the fee. Once it goes into default, that fine goes from $100 to $125 by ordinance because it's a $25 default fee. And with the percentage that is collected through the company that Vera utilizes to do collections through, they take 30% of the amount collected. So that 30% causes that $2.50 difference that we would owe to the vendor to complete that collections process for that violation if it goes into default.
Right. So I believe our ordinance calls for a $50 first time fee just on a regular roadway, not if it's in a school zone or a construction zone. So if someone were to default on the $50 fine, then how much would that cost us?
So we'd actually make $2. Actually, we'd make $7.50 more on a default payment if it goes into goes to the collection agency, because we have the $50 fee. They impose the $25 default fee, which is $75, and then when they collect 30% of the amount collected, the collections company would get $22.50, and we would get $2.50 on top of the $5 we would get. So a total of $7.50 for those types of violations.
Okay. So in just, you know, you Google the company, which went from American Traffic Solutions, I think, to this Vera Group. And under American Traffic Solutions, they had some issues in Houston with some contract violations. And it's my understanding they're still going through it. I don't know if anyone from the company has spoken to you about it, but there seems to be some issues there. Are you aware of any of those, and can you speak to any of those?
Councilor Vera, no, I don't know what their dealings are in Houston. I think if anyone would have to speak upon that, I think it'd be the company itself.
Right. And I know when we had this program out before, there was a lot of controversy with the company, I believe in the Chicago or the Illinois area, and that's why the program was stopped initially. And I'm just, you know, anytime you read about controversies, you get a little bit more in tune to what's going on, and I guess a little bit more leery about the company that we're dealing with. So I'm not sure what's going on there, and I don't know if the company would be available at future meetings to maybe speak to that. If you can talk to them and see if they're willing or able, that would be great.
Councilor Vitt, I'll reach out to them and I'll see if they can make someone available for the next meeting. I believe it's council. And so if any of those questions come up, they can address them.
All right. And my last question really has to do with timing. And, you know, we're still in the middle of COVID. We still have a lot of people out of work. Some getting funding from the state, potentially from the federal government. But really with that, they're having to prioritize paying rent, prioritize paying for groceries or potentially other things. So my question is this the right time to try to do this? I know with the plastic bag ordinance that we had, we did away with that so that people wouldn't have to pay 10 cents for a paper bag that groceries were being bagged in. And my thought with, if we had this in place prior to the emergency proclamation, that we may have looked at doing or putting this off to the side so that there wasn't that additional burden on drivers if they did get a ticket. And I'm not saying there's definitely not a good time to break the law or a time to sort of put it away. But when you're dealing with money and what people have to prioritize, I'm just wondering about the timing of this.
Well, Councilor Garcia, I think one thing you did speak to, and again, no one likes to get a ticket. The best way to avoid that, whether it's with this device or with one of our officers in the street, is to obey the traffic laws, do the speed limit, wear your seatbelt, stay off your phone. That's the sure way to avoid getting a violation or a fine. And the program, again, it's to improve roadway safety. We can certainly see that people are under unprecedented times. They may be a bit distracted, but again, that just underscores the importance of a program like this to make sure that they are aware of the speed limit of where they're traveling, that they are operating their vehicle safely. And, no one likes to get a fine. No one likes to get any type of fee imposed upon them. But if they are in violation of the law, and I think this council also looked at that, there's other means that are in place. And although people may be struggling to have a hard time to either provide for their families or they have to prioritize where their expenses go, the provision was passed by this council to allow for community service as well as an alternative to paying the fee. For us, again, if you're following the rules and you're not speeding, that's what we want to achieve. I think to go and say right now economically, if people are trying to struggle with, paying their bills or making this, paying that again underscores the importance of why they need to be driving safely, focusing on what they're doing, because the fees, the low end of the spectrum. If they get into a car crash, they get injured or injure someone else, there may be other associated costs with that. So again, the main focus is roadway safety. I don't know, saying if now would be the most appropriate time or when things are looking good or, down the road. But I think the big thing we have to take away from this is that we need people to drive safe. We've seen through COVID that people are continuing to travel, much to what Councilor Garcia said as well. He's hearing them there on St. Francis Drive. And some people, they are making use of the road now that it's not as heavily traveled by our daily commuters because they're telecommuting or they are out of work. They're, out there speeding on these roadways. And that includes both St. Francis and we see it on some of our side arterial roads too, such as Siringo and Rodeo Road. So I don't know, for me, I don't know if we can say, is this a good time? Is it not a good time? But, if you want to avoid a ticket and that kind of stuff, you just got to do the speed limit. That's what it comes down to, and be aware of that on your end.
Thank you, Chief. I get it. St. Francis is a good example since we can't put speed vans on that street, but I get it on the other street. So again, my concern is the timing, and I'm sure we could talk about that for days. But With that, that's all the questions I had, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Cassett Sanchez, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I must admit I've been pretty torn on this contract. I voted against it in finance. I have had some meetings with constituents where traffic again came up as one of the main issues. And in my area, it's really Rodeo, Camino Carlos Rey, Siringo, Governor Miles are the streets that I'm hearing a lot about, as well as some of the smaller side streets off of Airport. I think some of the concerns that I've been hearing from constituents about some other pieces have to do with equity of where these are placed. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how it is chosen, where they are placed. I know we briefly had this discussion, but especially with that equity lens of making sure that we are not targeting areas where there might be less wealth accumulated.
Madam Chair, Councilor Casa Sanchez. So it's going to be based on data. It's going to be based on constituent complaints that we get. One thing that we've seen during COVID is some people are home and they see those issues at a more frequent rate now because they're actually more aware of that. And the other side too is some of the areas where we've historically had speeding complaints continue to be areas of concern. I'm very humbled, and again, through this whole process, it's been great. Everyone on the governing body has been really supportive of us with our staffing and wanting officers out there to be able to conduct the enforcement and education. But the reality of it is the time to get someone hired, trained, and out there in the street, and especially during challenges now that we've experienced in the last year with the academy, being shut down for training, it really poses a lot of challenges for us. With these devices, again, it's a tool to help, improve roadway safety. It's to raise awareness for people to let them know, hey, here's the areas where they're going to be deployed. Here's the speed limit, and please abide by the speed limit. There'll be signage on approach on both sides of the camera. So again, if there's a lot of information out there letting people know they're going to be there. And when we speak to equity, again, these devices, they don't know, what your background is, your favorite team, any of that information, whether you're a man or a woman. It just knows here's a violation. It's going in excess of the speed limit. They issue the violation. It's validated, and there you go. So for us, it's going to be data driven. If we have a neighborhood that has concerns with speeding complaints, we can put one of these devices out there, or we can put out one of our JAMR, which is a surveying device, to see if it's an area that needs enforcement. And both those devices will give us the traffic volume, how many cars pass through, what is the range of speed that they're going, how many are in violation of the posted speed limit. And that's what's going to drive us for the deployment of these devices. I would love to be able to address every speeding complaint that comes in every day, and we deploy resources and we resolve it within that day. But oftentimes it comes down to people having to be on a list to say, all right, here's what we're going to focus on. And we put surveying devices, we'll put traffic officers out there, we'll put patrol officers out there to survey the area. And sometimes we see the traffic and sometimes we don't. And the big partnership that comes from it are people that bring these concerns forward. And there's been some good outcomes where I know at Camino Carlos Rey, there was a resident there that had a concern about a vehicle that was consistently speeding early in the morning, and our traffic team was able to find that person who was in a violation of the speeding laws that were there. And they had another slew of other items that came up where that person should not have been driving a vehicle in the first place. But that's the main focus of it, is bringing some relief to some of these neighborhoods and these side arterial roads that people are seeing these issues with speeding and other dangerous driving. And our hope is that we can deploy these resources there, and that would allow us to have officers then start focusing on those other areas where we cannot deploy these devices. And, until things change with the state, that's the way we're gonna have to tackle it from that point. But the equity in it, this device doesn't see people based on who they are, what their background is, and so on. It just looks for those violations. Is this vehicle speeding? And if it is, it captures the violation, it's then validated, and it goes out from there. the way that we're looking at deployment of devices, I just want to set one thing kind of clear. The company didn't say, hey, we'll give you a deal. If you get X amount of devices, we'll give you this much of a rate. The number of devices that we identified was based on the volume of concerns and assistance calls that we get from the public. And for us, that is our assessment to say, cool, we have 3 on the north, we have 3 on the south, and we'll deploy those devices equally. If the number 6 is a little bit daunting for everyone, you know, we can go down to 2. If we want 1 in the north, 1 in the south, we can give that one a shot and say, cool, let's see how this works. And let's see if it can fulfill the requests coming in from the community and the concerns that they have. You know, we're willing to work on this thing. Again, we understand that nothing's going to be 100% perfect, but we're willing to go and try this to see, will it make an impact? Will it make our streets safer? And that's something that we're looking to gain with this program.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. And I also want to thank you for addressing my next question. You covered it, which was looking at how this helps with department capacity and what that means for the fact that we are understaffed, as you had mentioned. Was there anything else that you would want to add to that other than the answer that you had previously given?
No, Counselor. I think I provided plenty on that matter, but thank you.
So I'm seeing the initial term is 18 months, correct? And then an option to renew for up to 4 years. Am I remembering those numbers accurately?
Madam Chair, Counselor Costa-Sanchez, yes, ma'am.
And then when we were looking at a pilot with only 2, how long would that pilot have been?
Madam Chair, Counselor Costa-Sanchez, so on the pilot, that was something that I was looking at when we're first looking at this program on bringing it back. Because we want to make sure, hey, look, here's what it looks like and kind of ease into it. And from looking back at the minutes, it was Chief Padilla that brought up that statement. But looking at this, again, we've had this program in the past. We understand how the process works. And one thing that we are looking to do, again, if this is approved through this contract, same thing like we did with the previous one, we're gonna have that grace period where we'll have the devices out and we'll be sending out those warning notices saying, hey, look, here's these devices, they're new, they're in town. If this would have been live, you would have been getting a violation for this speeding. And then they would know that here's the notice and we go from there. And then we put out that information once that grace period passes, hey, effective on this date, give people plenty of notice. They're going to be issuing live violations and then there will be a fine associated with that. So I know the chief mentioned about maybe rolling out a pilot for a short time period. Whether it's a pilot or if it's the full-on program, it would still require a contract with the company. And, you know, however you guys want to look at it from that point, if you feel that we should look at maybe a pilot, we can go back to the drawing board and see if that's something that the contractor can do. But again, we've seen this program in operation. We feel that we can be able to get it set up in a few weeks, few months, and then we can just get everyone. Because again, the education part is this: someone getting a notice, they may say, "Hey, I know it's on a trial program now, and it's just a warning," or they may not know. And when they get that notice in the mail, they may say, "Oh, well, I never realized." And we hear this time and time again. I never realized that it's 25 miles per hour on Serena Road. And for me, that's just really blows my mind because I'm like, that is a residential area. But that's where that education part comes into play. And, you know, this is, again, going to be a tool to help us do that. But if you guys have recommendations on that, that is certainly something that I can look at. But again, it's going to delay the rollout of this program. And we'll have to see if the contractor is amenable to that. And if that is something that we can do without incurring additional costs.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chief. I do appreciate that information. The other thing that I must say that I do like about the plan for this is the signage and that there is that warning. Do you have more description of what that signage looks like? How much will it stand out? How obvious will it be to drivers that, hey, there's a speed device up here, check your speed, slow down? Will we also there have the, warning of there's a speed device up ahead, FYI, you should be going 25?
Madam Chair, Councilor Costa Sanchez. So the signage that we used in the past, it's similar to like the road construction signs that you'd see. They're very prominent. They are portable, so we would have them out there because from a cost savings, we want to be able to move them as the devices move. They would be on approach. They're not going to be, small. It's going to be a pretty big sign. It's going to be very distinct and obvious, and it would say photo enforcement ahead, so they know that they're entering that area. What we also do whenever these devices are deployed, we make sure that there is signage that lets people know, hey, here's what the speed limit is in this area. Most every, like with road design, the city streets department, they do a really good job with making sure that those signs are kept up. And if they are missing or damaged, they get them replaced in a timely manner. But we're not looking for a gotcha moment. We want people to know, here's the speed limit, because we want that lasting behavior to stay where they are following the speed limit. So our thing is not looking for a gotcha moment. That's unfair. We want people to have more awareness about how they're driving on our streets. We want to get more people to follow the speed limits so that way, our streets can be safer because of it.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chief. This, as I mentioned, this has been a tough one for me. I did vote against it in finance. I did have a number of talks with some constituents that are in favor of this program because of their concerns of speeding. So I think that at this point, I'm willing to support it. I am concerned about what Councilor Rivera did bring up about the issues with the company. And so having somebody there to discuss that, getting some more information for me would be necessary in order to do a final approval of this at council. And I know that many of my colleagues have some concerns. And so if there were alterations that they would want to make, I would also be interested in hearing this. I think that it's a challenging topic. We know that speeding is a really big issue. This has been such a large concern in my district. Zia Road is the other one that I forgot to mention that, people go very, very fast on. But for final approval, I do think that there is some more information that I would need. And I also would want to see, if we do approve this and there is a reapproval of that contract, some of these issues that we have brought up, when it comes back to us in 18 months, I would really like to see a report on a lot of the information that has been gathered, if there's ways that we can quantify or even qualify how this has assisted the department with taking care of other traffic violations and other issues that my constituents are very concerned about. I would want to hear that. So I think that is another place of discussion is how do we really keep our eye on this if we do approve the contract at governing body to make sure that it's really something that is serving our community, that is providing the education, as you said, does not create these gotcha moments, and that really is serving to calm traffic, which is the end goal that I know that we are all really looking for is how do we make sure that people are driving safely? How do we make sure that they're going the speed limit? So I do think there are a few more things that I'd like to see at governing body and a few more discussions to have, but I do appreciate you being here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the committee?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
So, Chief, it says, let me see, page, I guess 2 of the memo that, excuse me, the breakdown for a $50 violation is $25 for the state, 20 to the vendor, 5 to the stop program. You said it was $750 to the stop program. And just wondering how you came to that number.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, that $750 would only apply if it's a payment that's in default, where the fine would go from $50 up to $25, or from $50 to $75 by 25 by way of the default payment, and if they had to go to collections. But that's where that $750 or $5 would go to the stop program, in addition to the $250 default payment based on the collections that would be made by the company.
All right. And if we're getting $5 for a $50 violation, why would we only get $250 for a $100 violation?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, for a $100 violation, it is a $10 because we get 10% of the fee. So it might be something on the mix up with the default payments versus if the amount is paid on the front end. If there's a default payment, it does change that. But what's in the memo is fees that are imposed and if they pay for it on time.
So, okay, so I thought initially you said for a $100 fine that we would pay $2.50 if it went to, I guess, a hearing officer.
If it went to default, so after 35 days of non-payment, the violation goes into default. And at that point, an additional $25 fee is incurred. Now, when that goes to collections, if they don't pay it, the collections company is going to receive 30% of the amount collected. So they'll be collecting $125. Of that, 30% of that they would keep. Let's see. It wouldn't, because that $25, they wouldn't cover that with that $25 fee that we have for the default payment. It's actually $27.50 if it's $125. That would be 30% of the amount collected for $125. So we would owe the company $2.50 for a default payment for a $100 fine that goes into default that's collected.
All right, and if a person, let's say you had a child that was speeding and you decided you wanted to do community service, how much then would we be paying the company?
So if it's community service, again, what's due to the company, if it's a $50 fee, we would have that person would be imposed community service for the amount of $50. So with the living wage amount that they have, it works out to maybe a few and a half hours. It isn't quite 5 hours, it'd be a couple hours. But the fees that are due for that violation, if we allow community service, would be incurred by the city. To be on the safe side, if it is a $50 violation, one thing I want to get with the state and validate is, do we still owe them that $25 for the violation? If it's one, because again, we are paying the company for that violation. So if we don't have to pay the state anything, we would pay the company $20 for processing that violation. And that would be paid for by the program.
All right, so you still have to check with the state?
Well, where my question lies on that is we're not collecting a fee from the violator. So at that point, it is a violation, but it's community service. We still have to pay the company for the services rendered for processing the violation. But if the fee's not paid, I need to see, does the state still get $25 for that violation? Or is it only for fees that are paid and imposed by the process? So that's something I want to verify with the state to see, do we still have to pay that? Because that's something that kind of stuck out to me. Because it can be debated both ways. Hey, they didn't pay a fee, they did community service, so is that something we have to pay the state for?
So you still have to ask that question.
That is a question I have with the state to see, because again, we're not collecting a fine. So it could be said, hey, look, we didn't collect a fee. We pay for the processing fee for the violation. So that would cost us.
So then in that instance, we may have to pay $20 for our portion, I guess, and then another 20 to 30 for the states.
It depends on what they say with that community service portion of it. But we'd be paying $20 for pretty much $50 worth of work that our community would benefit from. So that'd be something that, again, the community gains something from that in either.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from the committee?
I have my hand raised.
Oh, I don't have you. You know, the new update on Zoom makes your hands yellow. And so it
Mine
just,
isn't yellow. I'm just kidding. It's funny. You're right. It's different now.
blends in. It used to be blue and you could really see it. So sorry about that.
No problem.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a quick question for Deputy Chief Altez that I was trying to remember. The violator is sent a citation in the mail?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, ma'am. So they're sent a notice in the mail based on who the registered owner is for the vehicle. And we get that registered owner's address from the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Okay. So how do we deal with situations where people say, which is valid, like not getting things in the mail sometimes happens, or in a timely manner. So I'm just curious how we deal with situations where people get violations and they actually never actually received it in the mail. So what do we do with those situations?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, by state law, if you do change addresses, you're required to update your driver's license address and your registration address. When it goes out to the first notice, if it goes into default, then when it gets to the next step, they get that second notice. And, you know, again, if it shows that they were not delivered through that collections process, they'd have to come up and say, hey, look, I never received it in the mail. They'd have to prove that point. And again, through collections, they oftentimes send things certified mail to have them sign for it to ensure that they received it. So if someone says, hey, I didn't get it in the mail, they'd have to make their case, demonstrate proof, and then that would allow us.
How do you prove that? I mean, I couldn't prove that I didn't get anything in the mail. Like it didn't come so in the mail. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out if they didn't get it, they get a second notice, right? And then it goes to collections for the third time.
So they send out the initial notice, and when it goes into default, that's when that second notice comes out saying, hey, you're going to be in default. And that's when they're informed there's going to be the increased fee and that it's going to collections. Again, they have to maintain that mailing address. That's the way that they get mail. I find it interesting that people may not get mail. Could it happen? Absolutely. Could someone have taken it from the mail? Sure. But, you know, if it's at a post office and it goes to the registered owner's address that's on the registration, that could be something they can also raise or bring to the hearing officer and demonstrate, hey, look, I did not receive this in my mail. And they could see if it did go through the process.
Okay. What are options for a person to pay the fine, the citation?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, so they have a portal that they can go to. They can log in. They can pay through the portal via a credit card or with a check. And they can also mail in their payment to the company who will process the payment. So they can send it via check or money order.
Okay. And then we have the company then divides it accordingly based on the percentages. And do you see a record of that?
Councilor Villarreal, they'll send us the full amount that is received. It comes into our account. And then what they do is they invoice us, and it's our responsibility to send the portion off to the state. And then we pay the company their portion for processing that entire process.
Okay. Thanks for the clarity.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? As has been said earlier, we did see this in finance. I did vote against it there, and I did ask quite a few questions. I'm not going to repeat those questions here tonight. We have quite a few presentations around our affordable housing situation in Santa Fe that I want to get to. So if there are no more questions, it would entertain a motion from the committee. I don't know. What are your wishes?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Garcia.
I would like to make a motion that we go back to the contractor to renegotiate and see if we can enter into a pilot agreement with them, not under the current contract that's been put in front of us.
Okay, we have a motion to renegotiate the contract. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, can the maker of the motion explain that? Are we supposed to base it on what we currently have? What we're currently voting on, which is the contract. So by saying to renegotiate, that means to deny the current contract. Is that what the maker of the motion is trying to convey?
Yes. Yeah, so it's my understanding that the initial presentation given to the governing body last year called for a pilot program with 2 cameras. And I don't remember the particular time period for the pilot project, but I would like for us to move forward with 2 at the particular time, not the 6, and see how it works out for us as a community, and then potentially negotiate a lengthier contract with maybe more cameras. But I don't like the contract in front of us right now, and I'm trying to figure out a solution to how we can move forward. So I guess I'll ask my colleagues if there's any thoughts on that, or I can rescind my motion and we can discuss what we feel might work best for us as a governing body.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Garcia, I was just curious if you had or maybe if Deputy Chief Valdez had a idea about what a time frame for a pilot would look like, what the company. I think that's something that I'm very open to. As I've said before, I'm pretty torn on this one. I think that there's a lot of very valid points on both sides, and I think a pilot is something that I might be more comfortable with to really explore what this could look like before we go all in. So, Councilor Garcia or anybody else, do you have a thought about what a time frame for a pilot would look like? Would we look at 6 months? Would we look at 12 months? Deputy Chief, do you have an idea of what would be a valid amount of time to look at to really determine and look at some of these concerns?
Madam Chair, Councillor Cassett Sanchez. So with the pilot, this was put out in an RFP, and the RFP did not call for a pilot. So I think we'd have to probably confer with legal to see if that is something that we would do. And if we just either scrap this contract, put it out for an RFP all over again, and request a company to give us a pilot program and the potential for a program following that. But based on the contract, again, like I explained at the previous committee, it's 18 months for the initial year. If there's things we don't like with it, we don't have to renew it. And we can provide a termination to the contract at the end of that 18-month period and say we're not going to continue it, and there'd be nothing that we'd have to pay due to the company in doing so. With the number of devices, if 2 devices are what the pleasure of this committee is, again, we get to dictate the number of devices that we need, and that is not going to have an effect on our price point for the services rendered by the company. So in the contract, it says as many devices as we would need. But again, we're going to take our guidance from the governing body. And if you guys feel that you want 2 devices, and that's what we start out with, that is something that we can do that is permissible with the current contract. But to look at a pilot program and then roll into a full-on program, that was not in the initial RFP. So I think we'd have to confer with legal and purchasing to see, would we have to put this back out for RFP to include that? And will we then find someone that would still want to step up and participate in that program? And it begs the question too, what will that pilot look like? Will it be something where we have, violations going out and services being rendered and then payment due? Is it something where we send out warning citations during that whole time period? I think that'd have to be fleshed out in a new RFP for this. But I think if we're going to do that, we probably have to confer with legal and purchasing to see, does that change the terms of the RFP that we issued and that we provided to the contractors who wish to participate in this.
And right now, the contract is open-ended in terms of how many, so it doesn't restrict the number. So if we were to approve this contract, you can, it basically gives you the ability to add as many as you want going forward without coming back to us. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, we could say how many devices that that we could bring, but again, for me, that is not very respectful to this council. You know, the council is what gave us the resolution to bring this program back. And for us, we'd at least want to bring it to your attention and say, hey, look, you permitted us to get 2 devices to roll out this program. We show you the information that we have either a greater demand and we need additional devices. And we can say, hey, here's what we would need. I think that would be the most respectful thing to do. You know, again, this is something that was provided to us as direction by the governing body through resolution that the city manager restarts this program. We were given those that direction as well. And for us, this is a program that is being asked for us to put together. So I have no intention of saying, hey, thank you for approving 2. I'm going to order 50. Again, we want to make sure that this meets the needs and the values of our community. If 2 gets the job done, beautiful, perfect. If we no longer have a need for this program and people are no longer speeding, even better. I see that as something that we can see as an achievement. But it is not our intention to say, cool, thank you for the 2 on approval. We're not going to order 6. I think for us, we'd want to come back. And again, in the ordinance, it calls for us to give updates, regular updates on this program. How effective is it? You know, what are the violations looking like? And to pretty much show how the program is functioning. And if we do see those issues where we need additional devices, we would bring that recommendation and say, hey, look, here's what we would like to do. And the contract permits us to get additional devices, but that is something we want to bring to our leadership and to the governing body. Say, hey, look, here's what we're seeing. Here's what we would like to see in the number of devices.
Okay,
And,
I think we've got the answer. Thank you, Deputy Chief. So here's just a couple of thoughts. One, I want to be clear that it is not this current council that approved the ordinance. This council has changed dramatically since that ordinance was approved. So I just want to be clear that it's many people who sit on the council now were not part of that decision to restart this program. And then I think it's pretty clear that we don't like this contract. And so I think we have 2 ways to go forward. One is to table it and let some offline conversations go on to see if there's a way to bring back a contract that would be acceptable to the members of the current council and the company and our police leadership, or we can just disapprove the contract and have the same sorts of conversations. So we do have a motion on the table to renegotiate. Help me remember again, Councilor Garcia, what your motion was.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And at this moment, I'd like to rescind my motion. And if we just move forward, and I'd like to make a motion just to table this. I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to happen.
I would second that motion. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion to table, and I believe that's non-debatable at this point. So can we take the roll?
Of course. Councilor Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councilor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. Okay, so with that,
Madam
I'm sorry.
Chair, I'm not part of the Finance Committee, so I was just wondering how that vote went.
The Finance Committee voted 3-2. So the motion failed to approve the contract at Finance.
All right, so this shouldn't make it to the City Council meeting.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
That's my understanding anyway. I mean, if so I think that's an outstanding question, actually, as I think about it. So we've moved to table it. That stops it, I believe, from going forward. But then if it's an ordinance or a resolution, you have to have it pass one of the main council committees in order to go to governing body. This is a contract. So we need to check in with our legal folks about where we are. But clearly, I think there's some concerns about the current contract, the way it stands now. All right, so with that, we did spend an hour on that. I want to move to the other item that was pulled off the consent agenda, and that was item 1C, and that is the resolution reestablishing the bicycle committee. And I believe Councilor Villarreal, you said you had some questions or amendments.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just pretty self-explanatory changes to the resolution. I'm supportive of the changes to this advisory committee. I just wanted to add a few words for consistency, especially as this committee, touts a lot of the work they do is from an equitable standpoint, as it relates to development and maintenance of transportation infrastructure. So I'd like to add the word equitable on page 3 at the top, line 3. If it reads, bicycling and walking to the city of Santa Fe. Well, let me read the whole thing. Committee is to provide input and advice that supports the ongoing development and maintenance of a transportation infrastructure that makes bicycling and walking in the city of Santa Fe safe, and add the word equitable, and then continue viable, comfortable modes of transportation, commuting, and recreation. So that same sentence is stated 3 times in this resolution. So I would add the word equitable on that line 3, and then down below on line 13 after safe. So it would say safe, equitable, viable. And then on page 4, line 9 also says the same thing. So it would be safe, equitable, viable, and comfortable.
Okay, is that a motion?
Yes.
And are you moving to approve this with
Move.
that amendment?
Move to approve with the word equitable added to the amendment.
And is there a second?
Second.
And is there a discussion from the committee?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. I believe Councilor Garcia is the chair of this committee. I'm just wondering how many, so it talks about bicycle and pedestrian, but I'm wondering how many pedestrians, not bicyclists, that we have on the committee. Can you speak to that?
Sure, Councilor. And we also have our staff person for the committee on as well, and she can probably give some input. But we do have a number of folks that are walkers that walk the trails and not necessarily bicyclists by nature. One of them, Mr. Bruce Finger, he's not necessarily a bicyclist. He uses the trails, and I think he lives in your district. So we do have a number of folks that do both, or just look at it from the pedestrian perspective. Ms. Gloriosa Mas, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I have nothing to add. Most of them walk and bicycle the trails.
Yeah.
But Mr. Bruce Finger only walks.
You're right. So, and that's why it was my recommendation to put him on the committee. However, he's recently asked to be on the Public Safety Committee with some vacancies that we have there. So I just want to make sure that he's not the only pedestrian that we had on the committee, that there were others as well, and that if he does transition out, that we look at more just walkers or pedestrians that use the trails and aren't necessarily bicycle enthusiasts. So if you would keep that in mind, Counselor, as you look at people that might serve on your committee, I think that might be helpful.
Will do, Counselor. And I know that, as I mentioned, a lot of the current committee members do take into account pedestrian walkways and sidewalks because, during our meetings, they have plenty of input on what sidewalks need repairs and upkeep and whatnot. So we definitely have that perspective, and we'll make sure that as we recruit new members, we ensure that that is part of the selection procedure.
Great, thank you.
Okay, other conversation, or are we ready to vote on the motion? I'm sorry, Jennifer, almost called you counselor. Can you call the roll?
Of course. Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes, thank you, Counselor VRL, for those amendments.
Counselor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right. With that, we have finished our consent agenda, and we will go, I'm just getting my agenda here. We will go to our presentations. And we have with us tonight several members of our staff to begin some what I'd call a deep dive into city initiatives and programs on affordable housing, and just trying to get a lay of the land on all that we have been doing to work on this issue. And we will be continuing with presentations from advocates and others in the coming months. So I don't know, Eli, I see you're here, and I know Alexandra Ladd is also here. Did you coordinate, and Kira Ochoa is also here. I don't know if the three of you coordinated on how you would approach the information for tonight. So I'll just turn it to you, and maybe you can be the traffic cop.
Absolutely. Thank you, Counselor. And so I did have a chance to talk to Ms. Ladd today. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk to Kira. But what we were thinking, and if it's the pleasure of the committee, I would do some introductory remarks, some table setting around sort of the state of housing production in the city. And then from there, hand it off to Alexandra to talk about affordable housing more specifically. And then hand it off to Kira to talk about what we're doing to address homelessness in the community. So that's what we were thinking as a sort of a way to organize tonight's presentation. But we're open to suggestions or comments if you'd like us to handle it a different way.
Yeah, no, I think those were the items we had discussed having you present. I just wasn't sure if you had figured out the order, and I'm sorry that we didn't put captions on each of those segments. So I think that's fine. Eli, if you want to start that off, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you, Chair and other members of the committee. If I could share my screen, I would just like to run through some PDFs. I have some maps and some charts and some graphs that I'd like to walk us through to kind of explain where we're at with housing production right now across the city. So I don't know, I do have that. So with that, so if everyone can see this map, it's a little cluttered, but I have a series of two more maps after this that sort of break it down by under construction and in the pipeline. But I think that this map is instructive in showing sort of the amount of housing construction we have going on in the city, its distribution across the city, and that we have things in various stages. of construction. So we have some things that are already coming out of the ground and are close to receiving COs, and we have other things that are still in the design and approvals phase, coming through Planning Commission and other land use boards. So this is sort of everything that we have going on now. This is what we have under construction. And so as you can see, this is a roughly 1,800 units of housing. Much of this is multifamily housing, which I can show you the breakdown towards the end of my section of the presentation, the relationship of multifamily to single family housing. But this is sort of where we have, this is what we have under construction right now. So that means permitted and some level of work being done, whether it's grading work or actual vertical construction. And then at each parcel that we have flagged, we've listed the number of units that are associated with that project. And I'm happy to make all of this available to anyone who'd like me to send it to them. I can shoot you an email and include these as attachments. If we move on to the next map, this is what we have in the development pipeline. And so the yellow parcels are things that have already been approved by the Planning Commission, but have not yet submitted for building permits. And the green parcels here are things that have received approval from Planning Commission, and we are currently reviewing in land use right now to issue permits on. And so there's a couple projects in Districts 1, the Dos Ezequias project, the Alvord School, and then also Almadura on the north side of town. And then we have one project in Tierra Contenta, which is 20 single family homes that we are reviewing permits for. And the rest of almost, a little more than 1,600 units are things that are recently been approved by the Planning Commission. So
Director Isaacson.
Excuse me?
Director Isaacson, I just had a quick question. Do you have a quantitative, or can you quantify this amount that you just said? So these are developments in the pipeline, they've been approved, but they haven't necessarily, they're not under construction. Do you have a number of units for that?
I do. So if you look at in the legend, we have about, was it 1628 that the Planning Commission's approved, and then another 123 that are almost under construction. As soon as we release permits, those will be under construction. If we go back to the residential pipeline map under construction, that number is 1763. So when we add the two, just back of the napkin, we're at, what is that? About 3,400 units roughly that are in some stage of production in the city, which is, a really impressive amount of housing that's currently being produced. It far outpaces, as I'll show you later in my presentation, it far outpaces any period in our recent history in terms of housing production in the city. This is sort of unprecedented. I don't know if members of the council saw a recent article in the Santa Fe New Mexican, but Santa Fe metro area is currently 7th in the nation in new construction jobs. Construction is a huge growth industry for our city and our local economy. It produces quite a bit of money in direct revenue to the city through impact fees and just permit fees. But it also produces quite a bit of money in terms of GRT. And I think it's been a very important source of revenue from the city as we've been navigating through the pandemic recently. And a lot of that that construction, growth in construction is directly related to housing production in the city. So I alluded to sort of, let me rotate this. So I mentioned that this is sort of an unprecedented period of construction growth in the city. If we go back, looking back to 1997, we saw in the late 90s a spike in housing. And then obviously we saw a crash in housing production around the Great Recession in 2009. And we've been sort of bobbing along at a couple hundred units of housing on average through 2016. And then in 2017, we saw housing start to rise. Now, switching over, if we look at the total number of housing units permitted by year, this is again that 2017 number of about 400 units. Blue is multifamily, orange is single family. So we see back in 2017, not much, but some multifamily housing development, mostly single family. And then as we start moving through to 2018, we're up over 600 units combined. 2019 up over 800 units combined. And this is 2020 year to date. And this was produced in mid-November. So this number is actually, for the year of 2020, is actually a little bit higher than I'm showing here. But we're at roughly 1,000 units of housing permitted in 2020 alone. And so that's, if we start looking at then, what does that mean in terms of number of permits, the total valuation of those permits, and the total revenue generated by those permits? Now, this is total permitting. It's not just housing, but I think it's instructive. You know, again, during the pandemic, year to date, you know, we are sort of, you know, we're almost keeping pace with our permitting in the year before. But if we start looking at the valuation of that permitting, it's a little bit higher. This is the construction value of the permits we issued. And then if you look at the revenue generated, this is really an impressive number. You know, the land use department, through its permitting efforts, generated over $5.5 million in just permit fees that came into the city, and that goes into the city's general fund. Again, this was year to date in November, so that number is actually higher. And the reason why this number is so much larger than the year previous is because housing, and especially multifamily housing, is a huge source of revenue and permit fee generation. It's high value projects, and we get a lot of money from that in fees. And so, you know, housing is doing a lot to support our city's revenues right now. And then lastly, I just wanted to show a quick map. This is just a snapshot from the period of March to May of last year, but I think it's a trend that holds year long. And it's just the concentration of where our permitting is taking place in the city. And as you can see, the majority of our permits happening in districts 3 and 4 in the south side of the city, where we're seeing a lot of growth, especially growth around housing. So with that, I was going to hand it over to Alex. I can take questions now, or I will be here at the end of Alex and Kira's presentations and can answer questions then. It's really up to you guys.
Okay, I can't see oh, here, let's see. Do we have questions from the committee on this portion? I don't see any hands, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Chair, sorry, I didn't put up my new yellow hand. I apologize.
Blend in yellow hand. Okay, Councilor Cassett Sanchez.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eli. I'm sorry, I think on one of those maps, it was showing the percentage that is meets the definition of affordable housing. Can you pop that back up again, please? And I would love for you to send this over to me. That would be great. Thank you.
Maybe you can send it to the committee.
Absolutely, I'd be more than happy to. So I don't have those numbers, I don't believe, on these maps, but I do have some numbers more general, just sort of, I asked staff to provide a sense of our affordable housing. Let me stop sharing really quickly, and I can give you those overall totals, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, because I don't
something
think,
on the first map, Eli?
was it on there?
Oh yeah, it gives a percentage of affordable. There it is, down in the key. Thank you.
I do have some unit counts. If you just give me 1 second, I'll pull up that email. If you don't mind, I'm going to stop sharing. So right now we have 241 affordable units under construction and 501 units in the pipeline. However, I just would issue one caveat with that number related to the pipeline. Because some of these projects are still being developed, we don't have a final number of what number of units they're actually going to be providing in terms of whether they're going to do fee in lieu or actually provide the units. So that number is somewhat of a moving target, but I think we feel pretty confident that that 501 number represents the number of units that are in the pipeline. But it is a little bit of a moving target. But that 241 number, the units under construction, that's a firm number, and we feel really confident in saying that, you know, within the next year to 18 months, you know, the city will be providing at least another 241 units of affordable housing.
Madam Chair, on that point,
Yes, Councillor Villarreal.
so if you divide the houses, the housing units under construction, which was 1763, and then the 241 affordable, it's like 7% is affordable, which is dismal. But thanks for the numbers.
Yes, but I think, you know, what often gets, and I don't want to step on Alex's presentation, but I think that when we talk about the number of units being provided, it's really important that we also talk about the amount of money that's being put into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because those two things are inexorably linked to one another, because you have the option, right? You have the fee in lieu option, or you can provide the units. And so just looking at the units, I think, misses an important part of the overall picture of affordable housing in the city, because we have put in the last 18 months a tremendous amount of money in that trust fund. And a lot of that has to do with the recent changes that the council made in December of 19 around affordable housing that Alex can speak to with a lot more specificity than I can. But that's been a real boon to our affordable housing trust fund in the city, and has really leveraged and capitalized on the housing growth more generally. So it's an important piece of the picture.
And Madam Chair, if I could also just add to that as well, I think the map, when it's showing that percentage, because that was my reaction too when I first saw that, but what it's not showing is the breakdown between how many of those of the total number of units are multifamily and how many are single family, because the 20% requirement is applied to single family. And if it were broken out by the type of housing, you would see that all of these multifamily projects that are, for the most part, on this map were approved before we made the ordinance amendments. So since that time, we have 2 projects in the pipeline that aren't on here yet that are going to do a set aside, have affordable housing on site. So that's so this map will look different in 5 years.
Okay. Councillor Villarreal, did you have other comments?
Not yet. I just wanted to, I'm still looking at units, but I realize the importance of our Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Okay.
And Alex will speak to that. Thank you.
Great. I think I don't see any other hands up. I think we can move on, Alex, if you want to take the baton as it's.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to, I'm glad Eli started by showing you guys pictures, because I'm going to show you nothing but really super boring text. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to summarize the points that I think are important. You've seen some of these slides before. I will make sure that the presentation's available if you want to take a deeper dive. And of course, any follow-up questions, I'm available at any time to answer those. But I wanted to just kind of set the context a little bit for the trust fund and why it's so important. And also, I think, just to kind of give you a sense of the magnitude of how changing regulation and policy really affects what's happening on the ground.
So if I could just stop you, and I think we will be sharing perhaps this meeting more widely. I want to be clear that the trust fund we are speaking about is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that's what your presentation will be focused on. So thank you.
Okay, so are you able to see that title slide?
Yes.
Okay. So just to kind of refresh everyone's memory, the city's approach to providing and supporting affordable housing is really a three-legged stool. There's no magic bullet. You can't build enough inventory to solve the affordable housing problem. You can't subsidize away the affordable housing problem. You can't just have amazing regulation and policy. It has to be a combination of all three. So 25 years ago, when the city really got proactive about affordability, this was the framework that was put in place. And it's the three legs are the policy and regulation, and that includes the Santa Fe Homes program, which is the inclusionary zoning program. We also have two main policy documents to guide our funding strategies. I hear a lot, oh, we need an affordable housing plan. Well, I have two of them. Please don't give me a third plan. One of them is required by the federal government. That would be the 5-year consolidated plan. That relates specifically to our CDBG entitlement grant. The second is the 5-year strategic housing plan. And that applies specifically to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and is submitted to the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority every 5 years. So the second leg of the stool is the programming and capacity building. So years and years and years ago, the city decided took a specific philosophical approach and said, rather than trying to provide all of these community development types of services in-house, which just means we have to create a huge bureaucracy to do it, we're going to build the capacity of our nonprofit partners to provide these services. And as a result, Santa Fe truly has one of the strongest nonprofit services delivery systems. I would say the strongest in the whole state. And really it's because the city was super proactive in building the capacity in the community. The third leg would be the funding. And in this area, the city really, and this goes, it's beyond affordable housing. Office of Economic Development does this. Children and Youth Programming does this. Human Services does this. I think even the Arts Commission does this to some degree. But we really act more like a foundation. We act like a funder. So what specifically, we have three main funding sources. We have this Community Development Block Grant, and then this Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We also have the general fund, which we use in some more flexible ways to kind of fill in gaps, but also really to focus on the services side and the capacity building side. So the funding process, and Councilor Villarreal could present this slide since she's the chair of the Community Development Commission. We release our RFP. It will hit the streets on Friday of this week. The Community Development Commission is making the funding recommendation to the governing body. This is not a staff committee. This is the Community Development Commission. Well, I won't. This is, the whole HUD schedule is super boring. I won't even go into it, but we are very careful. We monitor these expenditures very carefully. Under CDBG, we call them subrecipients. Under the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, they're qualified grantees, but they are under very rigorous reporting requirements. So as a funder, we know what's going on and who's being helped and what the impact of the funds is. And again, going back to this idea that the community partners are really the cornerstone to the city's success. And I think another point to make is that this model is able to maximize financial leverage and private investment in a way that the city isn't able to do. So if the nonprofits are holding affordability liens, so they have built an affordably priced home, it's been sold for a subsidized sales price, we want to make sure that homeowner, that there's a lien and affordability control so that that homeowner doesn't happily realize a bunch of equity that wasn't theirs in the beginning because they bought a home for $150,000 that's actually worth $300,000. But the nonprofit, I mean, that lien can sit on the city's books and we have a bunch of them. But if it's held by a nonprofit, the nonprofit actually will use that asset to leverage other investment from other funders. So there's a lot more power to those funds when they're not sort of buried in the city's bureaucracy and the city's budget. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund currently is funded through revenues from development. So this includes the Santa Fe Homes Program fee in lieu and fractional fee payments. Now, a fractional fee payment is when the calculation, so the 20 or the 15% requirement results in a fraction of a home. So you can't build 0.2 of a home, so a developer will pay a fee. Or for, on the home ownership side, any projects that are 10 or fewer units are able to pay a fee in lieu of by right. And then on the multifamily side, as of 2016, a multifamily developer can also pay the fee in lieu by right. We hold these affordability liens, as I mentioned. They get paid off occasionally. We actually don't want them paid off because we want that home to be sold to another income certified home buyer. So we do everything we can to make sure that asset is recycled to the next buyer. But on occasion, they do get paid off. And that becomes revenue back into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And then land sales and tierra contenta. For quite a while, I think when you saw Eli's slide with the high numbers of permits in the late 90s and early 2000s, a huge amount of that was driven by tierra contenta. And every time land was sold, the city would get revenue to pay off the mortgage that the city owns on that property. Again, a qualified grantee is the recipient of funds from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and has to be an organization or a corporation with a mission to provide affordable housing. Or it can be an individual who earns less than 120% of the area median income. Use of the funds must be compliant with the New Mexico Affordable Housing Act, which provides an exemption to the state's anti-donation clause. And I kind of run into this a lot when I talk about how we invest funds and I hear, oh, what about the anti-donation clause? This is very, very, very strictly controlled. Capital costs of construction, rehab, preservation of affordable housing, direct financial assistance to income certified individuals. So that would be down payment assistance, rental assistance, home repair loans, or donation of or below market sale of publicly owned land, building, or infrastructure. So administration, services, staffing costs are not allowable. And I just want to leave you with that thought because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. And how, historically, how have funds been used? About 15% for home improvement, energy efficiency upgrades, emergency repairs for income qualified homeowners. Habitat for Humanity has stories about some of the folks they've helped that would make you weep. Little old ladies living in houses with gigantic holes in the floor and no heat for years because they just didn't have any resources to fix it. So there's some really great work has been done in that area. Down payment assistance. It's also called mortgage principal reduction because essentially what it does is it lowers the amount of the loan that the home buyer needs to borrow, which increases their buying power. And that's 35%. So that's somewhat the majority. And then rental assistance. Now this category is only a category since I came back to the city in 2012. But this is the point at which I was talking to LifeLink one day and they said, you know, if we had local funds to support rental assistance, we could get away from all of the crazy barriers and the strings attached that the federal funding comes with and these qualification criteria that nobody can meet. And we could be way more flexible and it could happen quickly. And we could just, as long as we could ascertain that somebody was either homeless or in danger of becoming homeless, you know, we could stabilize them. We can decide how long the assistance is going to last. We're not held to other rules. And so we started funding rental assistance actively. And now we have 4 separate nonprofits that are providing support to their constituents this way. Again, the capital cost of construction, and this includes pretty much anything, is 15%. Now that may start to grow a little bit as we have some more affordable housing projects coming online. And then homeless shelter and permanent supportive rental housing upgrades. So we've replaced roofs at shelters, Casa Familia, did quite a major remodel that we used some affordable housing trust funds for, accessibility improvements, ramps, security systems, that kind of thing. That's about a 10% of the total. And again, back to this idea that the leveraging power of local funds is it can't be exceeded with any other kind of funding. But we are also, like a funder, we're not just throwing money at a speculative project. We're looking at that last mile funding. This isn't seed money, it's not speculative. We want to help, we want to push those projects across the finish line. So we want a great project that just needs a little bit more to be even greater. And that's kind of where the city funding comes in and really brings the most impact. We talk about leverage and match. Match is an organizational resource. So if an organization is dedicating 3 staff people to a program, that would be their match. Leverage is that the organization's dedicating 3 staff people, that's their match, but then they're also raising more money to pay 2 more staff people from a different funding source. So that would be leverage. Again, for CDBG, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. We require $1 of matching funds for every $1 of CDBG. For the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, it's even higher. It's 1 to 3. We know over the past years of doing this that for every $1 provided for down payment assistance, an average of $14 is leveraged, which would be the buyer's resources plus the value of their privately financed mortgage. For every $1 provided to support the capital cost of rental unit construction, we're leveraging about $10 of investment, which includes both private equity and debt. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good investment record. So, you know, all of you can pat yourselves on the back because I think we're doing pretty well. So now I'm finally sort of getting to the topic here. So we're looking at kind of where did the regulation and how did the regulation and the trust fund intersect? I think as all of you know, in 2016, the inclusionary zoning program, after almost 10 years of not adding any multifamily units to our pipeline. Now, Eli's graph was showing units those years, but those were units that had already been approved in prior years. So they were being built in those years. But really, we hadn't had new units approved except for the Zaffarano project. But that was because they did a first phase of a tax credit project. So that's how they complied with the inclusionary zoning program. So in 2016, we realized we had to do something because our market basically wasn't adding new inventory on the rental side. And I am saying market, not the affordable housing side, because the affordable housing side, we had added over 400 units. And we had supported the rehab of about 400 additional housing authority units. So the affordable housing side was doing pretty well, but the market side wasn't. So this buy right allowance in 2016 was for rental units only. And that's bolded because I can't even tell you, I get calls from single family developers. They say, yeah, we want to pay that fee in lieu of. I say, you can't unless you want the governing body to approve it. So that's just a really important point to make because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. In 2020, we amended the 4-year sunset clause to make the allowance permanent, but more importantly, and this is where you're going to start to see that distressing low percentage number change, Councilor Villarreal, is that we made the requirement more flexible. We made the compliance objectives simpler. Before there were sort of 3 different tiers of incomes and 3 different tiers of rents, and you know it was complicated. We've sort of condensed those things to make it simpler. And then we focused the incentives to result in the actual set aside units. So we've asked, this is based on conversations with developers, like if you didn't have a cost at a certain place in the process, like where would that help the most? And the other point I want to make, because I know the fee in lieu of causes heartburn for everybody, but I think to expect a market rate developer to undertake the very complicated process of providing rent restricted units to income eligible certified renters is kind of like expecting your dentist to give you a knee replacement. It's just, there's some similarity. They might know how to work the anesthesia okay, but they're really out of their element. And so that's kind of what we had set our private market developers up with. We said, now we are going to insist that you do something that you have no knowledge of how to do, no experience doing it, and you're not going to do it well. But good luck. Oh, and that cost hit to your project doesn't come just once like it does on the home ownership side when the home is sold. It comes every month. Every single month you lose money. And so I think what we really tried to do in 2020 was we talked to tons of developers, but we tried to make it so that it actually could work with the market and enable the market to help us. And again, the last bullet on here, this is, you just saw these numbers on Eli's slide, but I think it's pretty impressive because that's not a huge span of time in the development world, is to have this many units actually both under construction and in the approval queue. And so here here's a little bar graph of the revenues into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. You can see this arrow and it matches Eli's graph with more and more units, and more of them are multifamily. And look at this, we actually have substantially more income coming into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Since June of 2018, 1.5 million of this revenue was directly from the fee in lieu payments by multifamily developers. So that's significant. And I should also mention, prior to this, we were lucky if we got $200,000 to $300,000 of revenue in that fund a year. And so just a couple of thoughts to leave you with, and then I'll stop talking with all of these terrible black words on the screen, no pictures. What I want to get on everyone's radar is that this revenue stream that we have now, it's not sustainable because it relies on development activity. And so you saw how the arrow went up in alignment with the unit bar, the bars of units on Eli's graph. Well, years when there's a little short bar, there's going to be not very much revenue. The other thing, and this is more my opinion as a planner, the construction of new units is the main trigger for the requirement. And I think as we look at issues related to sustainability and quality of life and taking care of our environment and taking care of the people who live here, building new units forever until we fall off the edge of the earth is just not going to be the future for development. I mean, we are really going to have to get proactive, looking at ways to redevelop, densify existing developments, and convert underused uses into housing. And I just want to put that out there, that I think that is going to be the more sustainable route for our future growth. And then the other thing, and you'll hear this from people in the land use and real estate development sort of industries and related industries, the inclusionary zoning puts all the burden of providing private market support for affordable housing on their industry. And I think as the conversation in follow-up meetings, you'll hear some suggestions on how to broaden that kind of collective contribution to affordable housing through other revenue sources and through diversifying revenue sources. But I think it's not it's not a point to be taken lightly, because it has traditionally been the burden of that one industry to support affordable housing on the private market side. And I think that as we look at different sources for the trust fund, we're going to start to look for ways to kind of spread that burden out across other parts of across the other drivers that are changing our community and making it grow. And I think that's my last slide, so I will stop sharing.
Okay, thank you. We can move to Kira's presentation, or we can take questions here if there are questions. Oh, and Councilor Rivera, I see your yellow hand up. Are you ready?
Yes, thank you. So Alexandra, I just read an article recently about the county, I think medium listing of a home, I think being over 500,000, and really the median price of a home in the city limits being around 450,000. Are you concur with those?
Well, that's what's selling in the market.
Right.
Yeah.
So really, if you're a family that's grown up here, you have 2 kids that have grown up here, and they want to purchase a home in Santa Fe, with the median price being about 450,000, how much would that couple have to earn to be able to afford a house?
I'm not going to give you a super definite answer without looking that up, but they would, yeah, I mean, I can get you a pretty specific answer, but they're probably over 120% of the area median income. And at that income, they are not eligible for any other kinds of assistance. So that's, that's definitely an issue. The other thing too is I read that same report. I think the market's a little bit funky right now because there's so little inventory that houses are really going for a premium, and the people who are mobile right now probably aren't those families. So they're in the housing they're in. So that's sort of a strange situation. I think once the pandemic grip lets up a little bit, that might level out to some degree because it is really crazy right now. But you're absolutely right. And that is why continuing to support projects like Tierra Contenta, which has a subsidized pricing limit and income qualifications, is actually, even if a family doesn't qualify for the subsidized house, what that does in the market is it brings down prices across the market. I won't say it brings it down, but it creates a little bit of a ceiling on that kind of insane acceleration.
So how do we define affordable housing in Santa Fe based on the median price of 450 some thousand? Is it based on just Santa Fe, or are we looking at the area?
So we're not looking at that data point at all. What we're looking at the incomes of the home buyers. So our inclusionary zoning program creates pricing tiers at 3 different income points, with the max being at 100% of the area median income, which for the current year for a family of 4 is, I think it's $76,000. That's 2020 prices or 2020 incomes. We'll update that shortly when we get the data from HUD. So that, and at that price range, that family can have a monthly payment that doesn't exceed about 30% of their income. And it's gross income, so it's not take-home pay. So that's another place where it feels unaffordable, but they're probably looking at about a $350,000 house that they would be getting qualified for.
And that's without the Affordable Housing Trust Fund supplementing that, or is that just on their own income?
That would be, it's actually a combination of both. So, it's really hard to have a standard set of rules for situations where everybody's situation is so unique on an individual level, right? So you could have 2 families, they could earn the exact same income, but they could have very, very different financial situations every month. So one family maybe has a little bit more debt, another family maybe has to spend more money because they have a family member with a disability, or they have some other need that's expensive for them, or whatever that looks like. So the two families with the exact same income buying the exact same priced house according to the subsidized pricing schedule, one family may need that $20,000 down payment assistance loan, and the other family may not. So the way our both HomeWise and the Housing Trust are the city's agents to get those funds out to families. So they're really doing it on a case-by-case basis. They're figuring out who needs what.
Yes. Thank you. So we're just looking at Santa Fe. We're not looking at Rio Rancho or Albuquerque or Moriarty or Las Vegas or any of those other areas. So we're just focusing on Santa Fe, right?
Correct.
All right. So I guess, we hear this question a lot, and it's why aren't more people that work here living here? And again, when you're not comparing Santa Fe to Rio Rancho, that's comparing apples to oranges. Mm-hmm. And really, even affordable housing in Santa Fe is really a lot more expensive than housing in Rio Rancho. Mm-hmm. And based on what you can get for the amount of money that you're going to pay, it may be in some cases more appealing to really look at somewhere other than the Santa Fe area. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think too, we years ago, the Office of Affordable Housing, I think it was even before I came back, did a survey of all the public safety workers, because the police officers commuting to Rio Rancho and the city of Santa Fe police cars, and that was an interesting survey, because the reaction from a lot of those folks, and not everybody, there were a lot of people who wanted to live in Santa Fe, but a lot of the public safety folks were saying, we don't want to live in the community that we're policing. We actually like having that distance. And others were saying, Santa Fe I just got a job there. That's not my community. I grew up in Espanola. I want to live in Espanola, or I grew up in Rio Rancho and I want to live there. And so I think there's more. It's easy to kind of use a broad brush to that and say, oh, we can't support our workers here, so they can't live here and they don't live here. And I think that's absolutely 100% true for some people. But I also think there's some personal choice in there where people are making different decisions. And sometimes too, I think when you get a job in Santa Fe, that the job market in Albuquerque is bigger and has more variety, and there are a lot more opportunities there. So you may not know if the job in Santa Fe is going to last forever. So it feels like, I think I'll stay in Albuquerque and commute. And then if I need to change jobs later, I've got more choices near my home. I've also had this conversation with Mike Lofton, because HomeWise has an office down in Albuquerque, and he was saying just the market rate houses there's so many more options and choices. And you can buy a very expensive house in Albuquerque, but if you're not in that market, you have choices in a much lower part of the market, whereas in Santa Fe, our choices, and some of that's just a function of it's fewer numbers and it's a smaller market, but the choices are just so much more limited.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess in summary, you really have to, if you're from here and you work here, you really have to want to live in Santa Fe and go through the programs and go through everything else based on an average income, I guess, to want to stay here. Otherwise, we're gonna lose workers to other places, and that's all I was trying to get to. And mm-hmm. I think you answered that beautifully. So.
And Counselor, if I could also add to that, I think another piece of that puzzle is having affordable rental. And even if it's market rate and it's not subsidized rental with actual rent restrictions, but just like a market rate product that you can afford to rent, that's a big gap there too, because when renters get to the point where their rent payment is stressing them out financially, they're going to try to change that if they can. So I think the more rental options we have, the more sort of time we buy for somebody to actually get to a financial position where, or even a personal position. I think some people renting is the best option and the only one they ever want, because they want to have that kind of flexibility. But you know, we just, in this market right now, we have sort of the super high-end exclusive stuff that's not going to work for most people, or we have a great subsidized inventory, but if you make more money, you can't live there anyway. So some of what all of these units coming on the market are going to do to our market is that they're going to soften some of the rental rates here, not across the board, but just that inventory, you know, it's the supply demand curve. That inventory is going to bring down some of the crazy accelerators we've seen in the market recently.
Yeah, so that brings up another question about the affordability of rental units, and really what's the definition of an affordable multifamily unit. And I don't know what that is. And really, if I don't know, can you answer that question first?
So again, the standard rule is 1/3 of somebody's income should go toward housing cost. Otherwise, they're considered rent burden. So again, it's kind of an individual equation. HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, has a statistic called the fair market rent statistic, where they look at a lot of different market factors, and they say, in general, a 2-bedroom in Santa Fe will rent for this number, but it's not really based on any individual's experience. It's a statistic that kind of lumps in a lot of higher level things. And I also would say that that's one of the important pieces of rental subsidy to individuals, whether it's through a housing voucher from the Housing Authority or through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because you might not be creating an affordable unit from scratch, but you're making a unit affordable to someone. So there's kind of like, you're sort of looking at it on both sides. One is to control the cost, and the other is to bounce up the capacity of that person to afford the cost.
Yeah, and I've spoken to some public safety personnel that, you know, were in multifamily apartments or units, and their rent payment was pretty high. So for that same payment, they could move to Rio Rancho and be living in a home that they'd be putting equity into versus just renting on a monthly basis. So yeah, just some concerns I have, just really comparing ourselves to ourselves versus to other places. But you did a good job answering my question. So thanks, Alexander.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions from the committee, or are we ready to move on to the final presentation? Don't see any other hands up. So thank you, Alexander. That was very informative. Let us move then to Kira. And if you could, Kira, maybe just, I don't know, give us a subtitle for what you're going to talk to us about.
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilors, thank you. I'm here with my staff person, Anna Kale, who works very much on homeless issues in the Community Services Department. You know, I think when we switch to talking about homelessness, I think in the context of the conversation, we should think about homelessness as the kind of the canary in the mine indicator on some level for our housing problem in Santa Fe. Of course, the causes of homelessness are complex, but the biggest reason people are homeless is because they don't have homes. So, you know, I think that when we look at that in the context of what we're talking about affordability, our homelessness problem is very much related to the fact that we don't have enough of a range of truly affordable units that are proper to what people need. So, you know, in the Community Services Department, we address this issue of homelessness primarily by funding shelters, right? We funded historically Saints and Interfaith, and we moved into doing some contracts for things like the Better Way van, which is all very well and good. But if we really want to get to the root of it, we want to eradicate homelessness. That's a high level goal. And in order to work on that, we joined, as everyone knows, I think, the Built for Zero movement, which is a national movement dedicated to ending homelessness. And so wanted to just talk about kind of where we started and the progress we've made in the last year in that work. We joined in the spring of 2019, and we really, how many units we need, what kind of units we need, we can't really answer that until we know who our people are and what they're going through. How many people are homeless, how many people are in danger of being homeless, and what kind of affordability do we need. Is everyone able to see this okay, or should I maybe switch to a slideshow? I'm not that adept.
I can see it, but it might declutter the screen a bit.
Yeah, I want to do that. There we go. That's better.
There you go.
So thank you. So who's experiencing homeless here in Santa Fe, and what do we know about them? What else do we need to know to support their housing needs? Do we have homeless people in Santa Fe who are earning $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month, and they're homeless because of this housing market problem that Alex has shed some light on? So we need to understand who they are, what they need, and what the gaps and the kinks in our system are, and what it'll really take for Santa Fe to end chronic and veteran homelessness. Chronic homelessness is defined as being homeless for more than 12 months. And so we joined this movement with a goal to really end chronic and veteran homelessness. It's not a narrow goal in that in order to do that, we need to basically bolster up the entire system. And ending homelessness really refers to this concept in Built for Zero called reaching functional zero. It doesn't mean we never have any homeless people in Santa Fe. It means that once we've reached functional zero, we really have a way of making homelessness very brief and being able to house people within a month of them being identified as homeless. It sounds like a very lofty goal. Other communities using this methodology, 12 in the nation have ended veteran homelessness, and 5 have ended chronic homelessness, and 3 communities have ended both. So we want to join those ranks. How do we do it? We start with this concept of the by name list. That's again, what are all the people? Who are they? What are their names? What do they need? Do they have vouchers? Are they veterans? It's a dynamic list. It's a tool and actually a system for making us able to house people rapidly, keep people housed, and really know, again, what kind of numbers we need in terms of units, permanent supportive housing, and other kinds of units. So it gives us a picture, if we get this right, what is the scope of our need at any given time? How many people do we have moving in and out of our homeless response system? And what progress are we making? It's a continuous quality improvement tool that allows us to say, how are we doing in addressing this problem? Our partner in the work is the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. They house what some of you have become familiar with by me sort of harping on it, which is the coordinated entry system. And that is really our local by name list. And it's a mechanism where we can connect the most vulnerable people to housing using a community and a collaborative approach. You may recall that we recently put into the interfaith shelter lease that participation in coordinated entry so that we can really bolster that data coming in and handle on what's going on. I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who's going to tell us a little bit about the data currently in our by name list.
Yeah, good evening. So the list currently, these are the numbers that I got from the coalition yesterday afternoon. It's important to note that these numbers change on a day-to-day basis as people move in and out of the community, as people are housed, as people become homeless, and also thinking about some of the different definitions that HUD uses to define various types of homelessness. These numbers kind of shift a little bit day to day. Where we see really big changes over time kind of tells us a lot about how we're doing. When we joined Built for Zero a year and 2 years ago, I think we had about 60 chronically homeless people and about 150 households total in our system. Now, looking at our numbers now, where we have 367 households total and 197 of those are chronically homeless, that doesn't mean that we've had a mass, you know, that our numbers of people experiencing homelessness have like doubled. But really the way that our system has been able to capture that information and, you know, the systems that we've put in place to track people and to pay attention to where that data is coming from and where it's going and who's where has pretty significantly, drastically improved. So going over these numbers, we have 367 households that are experiencing homelessness in Santa Fe right now. And households, that's kind of defined as sort of any sort of clumping of people that would be housed together if they weren't housing. So that could be a couple, that could be a family with children, that could be a single person. 197 of those are chronically homeless. And the breakdown there of what that is from single adults, families, youth, and veterans. 54 of all those total households are families with children. 21 are youth, so unaccompanied youth that are not part of a family household and that are under the age of 25. 11 of those are veteran households. And then on kind of all involved in that are 282 people, which is 232 adults and 50 children in 140 hotel rooms.
I just want to add that, you know, part of our role in all of this has been to be what's called the community lead. The New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness is our data lead. And what we've done a lot here is really just convene and have these conversations about how to make the system better. And this is where we started, and I'll turn this over to Anna.
Yeah, so, you know, when we first joined Built for Zero, some of the kind of glaring issues that we saw in our community were really around how our system overall functions and flows and where there's coordination and where there really isn't. Part of that, you know, a big part of that kind of comes from funders. So we have a variety of funders throughout the state, federal, local governments, on top of, you know, private foundations that are funding homeless service providers and housing providers to do a variety of different things. And between those funders, there's very little coordination and cohesion on what the goals are, what measures are being used to, you know, look at those goals, what activities are being funded and which aren't. So what a big process that we've been working on is looking at this picture in front of you and figuring out how we kind of got there and what processes we need to take to get that alignment happening. So figuring out where, you know, we can work together to kind of make some of these things a lot more cohesive.
So we're kind of in the middle. I don't know if we're in the middle. I hope we are. Where we are right now is some of the things that we've done, implementing system improvement to this coordinated entry work where the by name list lives. And, you know, we can get into more detail on that at another time. But essentially that means like when the providers come together at a table, you know, are we working the list? Are we saying these are the most vulnerable people, not just, and these are the people that really need the housing, not just who can we easily house now? The Connect network has been helpful in that it's if you think of this as a filter, you know, there are questions on that screening tool that thousands of people are now being asked in our community. We had up to 12,000 people in the recent pandemic being asked the question, you know, are you basically secure in your housing? Are you in fear of losing are you in danger of losing your housing within 30 days? Are you now currently unhoused? So with that wider filter, we can bring in referrals into the by name list of people who are homeless, and we're getting those better numbers. We expect to see those numbers rise before they start to go down, and we'd be happy because, as Anna said, that means we've done our work in getting good data. Also around good data, Anna, can you just explain the point in time count?
Yeah, the point in time count is an unsheltered survey of, a survey of all people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And that happens every 2 years in kind of lockstep with a sheltered count that happens every year. So on one night at the end of January, it's actually next Monday night, the community providers will come together and try to do their best to get a really good count of who was experiencing homelessness, either unsheltered or sheltered, on that one night. And that gives us a little bit of a snapshot of what our number looks like. Historically, New Mexico has not done, it's just not been a very highly prioritized task to do a really great count. But this year, partially because of the pandemic and just, you know, some new invigorated staff members involved in it, we're really shooting to get like the most accurate count that we can.
If I could just stop you, can you define sheltered? I mean, are we talking about homeless shelters, sheltered,
Yes.
or are we talking about sheltered as in a roof over your head?
So people who are experiencing homelessness but are in a sheltered location. So a homeless shelter is typically what we're talking about. Also
nowadays, hotels as well.
Yeah, and hotels, other sort of institutional settings are counted in that.
On that point, just to clarify for a point in time, so someone that's couch surfing, that wouldn't be, is that still considered sheltered?
It is actually not considered homeless at all by HUD definition. Yeah, it's tricky. A lot of families that are doubled up, tripled up, people that are couch surfing are by definition, and that's not a definition that we get to set. Unfortunately, they are not considered, they're not counted in this.
However, we do get to count them and connect. So we are getting a bigger picture in that realm. You know, again, toward the how about people who are unsheltered? How are we reaching them? Thanks to the CARES funding and some, you know, we've been able to purchase the mobile hygiene unit. And we, Anna's written a very good RFP that we hope to get out here in February for combined street outreach and operation of that mobile hygiene unit. And that they're a local contractor will help us do outreach to encampments, to people in arroyos, and hopefully bring people who are on the streets and not accessing our shelters into our sort of services, importantly, but also, again, getting a count so we know. And I think that will help tremendously to get a quality by name list where we really have a better sense. We've gotten a lot of buy-in through Connect and recent work from the shelters in getting people into databases and systems. And this is a population that we need to include in that. Of course, thanks to the wonderful work of Alexandra Ladd and the Community Solutions team, which is the umbrella organization for Built for Zero, and the CARES Act funding, we were able to buy the Santa Fe suites, where we have now 122 affordable units, and they really are affordable. They're probably going to be about, can I say this number, Alex? We think they'd be about $500, $450 a month. They're small units, and that makes sense, but that is a really affordable unit for a single person or a couple. And 40 of these are set aside for people experiencing chronic homelessness and veteran homelessness. And right now we have 13 homeless people there who've been housed. 4 of them were chronic and 1 was a veteran. So really we're in a place of looking at system-wide community planning to create more housing units and secure more housing subsidies and improve overall coordination. This is the system we hope to get to.
Yeah, so if we think about our previous system model, which was really messy, this is really where we're trying to get, is where everyone in our system has access, whether they're seeking help, they're in an encampment, they're encountered through outreach, or they're showing up in our hospitals, school systems, shelters, can all be sort of funneled through the same process that's equitable and fair and prioritizes the most vulnerable, needy people in our community into safe and stable housing.
We've learned a lot. This is our last slide during the pandemic, and terrible thing, the pandemic, but it's also given us a lot of solutions that we hope to build upon as we go forward. We have the Midtown shelter, obviously that won't be there forever, but this idea that maybe shelters don't need to be congregate situations. Maybe they can be dormitory style situations, certainly safer in a pandemic, but really better off for people getting stabilized all around. We're finding it's helped us reduce our census at shelters. The hotels are providing isolation, social distancing. Again, they're also really showing shelter staff that didn't think people could function outside of a congregate shelter, that some people actually can. That means they can actually function in housing as well. That's in the shelter realm. In terms of outreach, of course, we are looking at allowing some encampments and an emergency policy that allows small encampments in places that are not, that are on city property, that are not environmental hazards. And then that's also allowed us to step up the fire department outreach to people who are sleeping outside. Now we have a system that goes through constituent services where people can call in and say they're concerned about an encampment, and there's a way to actually get to those folks and hopefully connect them to services. We are really doubling down on community partnerships, and they've been really strengthened during the pandemic. You know, we've had a lot of partners step up, new partners like Ancorum Foundation really taking an interest in this work that we're very excited about. And that's really improving our system alignment and coordination. I think we're putting a lot of pressure on our data partner, and they're really stepping up, New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness, where Anna formerly worked. So we're really, you know, happy with that collaboration. And then the data is what tells us, again, how many units we need, what kind of units we need, and how we can keep improving the system, you know, continually as we go. And that is the end of our presentation.
Okay, thank you for that. This has been very informative, all three of these presentations. So thank you all for being here. Questions from the committee on this last piece, the Built for Zero model that we've been participating in? All right, I don't see any yellow hands.
Mine is a brown hand.
Oh, look at you. You can change the color of your hand. All right.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just wanted to thank everybody for your excellent presentations and very informative, lots of information. I just had two questions. One was for, I guess, Director Isaacson about the fee in lieu of change that we made last year. And if you could give us an idea of how many developers opted to use those other options that were provided. Other than the traditional model that we've had in the past, the fee in lieu of. So I know there were different ways that they could utilize it. Have you seen developers utilize the other options?
I have. Thank you, Councilor Villarreal. So I don't have numbers. I can certainly look into it. It'd probably, Alex, I would probably reach out to you to help try to track down, to get a sense of which projects took advantage of the fee in lieu versus which projects provided affordable units. I do know that we've recently approved several projects that are providing units, and that's not just multifamily projects, but that also includes single family projects. And I think actually, and this is just from memory, so you know, I can confirm this, but I actually think that a large number of our single family projects are providing the units. It's the multifamily projects, and it's the multifamily projects in certain areas of the city where the underlying land values tend to be higher, is where developers are opting for the fee in lieu, so that they can rent the units at a market rate. So, but we do have, you know, again, thinking about it in terms of percentages, if we looked at our pipeline map, we had around roughly 1,750 units there. 501 of which are estimated to be affordable. So we're moving up from that 7% that you mentioned earlier, closer to almost 33 or a third of the units. So, and those projects, those pipeline projects, are ones that better reflect the changes that we've made in the affordable housing fee in lieu program as recently as 2019. So I think those are more indicative maybe of how we might move forward. And Alex, if you'd like to add to that.
Sure, if I may. Councilor Villarreal, there have been no market rate developers who have gotten approval and entered into an agreement to provide on-site affordable units yet. But part of that's because all of those units that were reflected on the maps that Eli showed, those were all approved prior to the changes we made to make the ordinance more flexible. Now that the ordinance is more flexible, we have 2 projects in the pipeline and they're still working out their final performance, but they are going to do, one's going to do a combination. They're going to do 10% on site and a 5% fee. Another one has created a market rate product that is actually well below what the affordable rent requirements would be. Like, that's the best of all worlds. And now that we've amended our ordinance, we can reward that by giving them fee waivers and other incentives, because, you know, really at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want the market to create an affordable product.
Thank you for that additional information. That was helpful. I think what I struggle with, and we've talked about this in the Community Development Commission, is we look at market rate multifamily units and they provide a market rate rent option and it's approved and they pay a fee in lieu of, and then later on down the way, they start increasing rental costs. The rents go up and we have no way to offset that somehow by requiring them to do like some kind of additional fee. I don't know what it looks like, what it could be structured as, but it's just hard to see how they start off with a certain market rate. And then because there's the demand, because the market's doing well, they can increase their rents. And it then creates problems for people that are just trying to make the current market rate rents that they're in. So I know we don't have rent control, and that's a problem for me. I'm always trying to think of a way that we can incentivize those those rental units or those multifamily developments so that they stay at certain rates and rental rates that people can afford.
So
I know it's complicated. I don't know if there's an answer, but
it is complicated, but we are looking at kind of simplifying a way to do that with one of these projects that's in the pipeline, which is that they will tie their rents to the fair market rent standard. So that is a kind of rent control, because if the market goes wild and they can crank up the rents on the other units, they can't increase their set aside units by more than what the fair market rent increases. So the advantage also with using the fair market rent is that it means that federal subsidy can be used at those properties, because otherwise you can't use federal subsidy at properties where the market rent is much higher than the fair market rent.
And also, I mean, this is an area where hopefully by increasing the amount of supply of housing in our market, we may be able to offset some of that upward pressure on rents. So by having more housing available, it's not quite as limited. There's not as much competition, and therefore the housing rents go down. And I know also, and Alex, you may have some insights into this. I know that by building more new housing, some of our older multifamily developments in the city, therefore sort of become less attractive, and therefore the rents tend to go down at some of our older properties, where for so long where we had no new multifamily projects coming online, that the rents at some of our older developments were sort of artificially inflated, and there was an upward pressure on those. And so hopefully by bringing a lot of new supply into the market, we'll see sort of a spectrum or a range of rents available to folks in the city. And in doing so, will make some properties more available or more affordable for folks than they were previously. So that's where I think one of the areas where increase in supply will have an effect on affordability through the rental market.
yeah, I think that's a possibility. I also feel like Santa Fe's always been expensive and it doesn't go down even if our market isn't doing well. So that's hard to figure out. Thank you for the additional information. I think, let's see, the question I had was for Kira, Director Ochoa, if you could describe a little bit more about encampment opportunities that would be on city property. And what I'm thinking about is maybe similarly what they do in Las Cruces with the Campus of Hope, I think they call it.
Haven for Hope. Madam Chair.
What is it called again?
Haven for Hope.
Haven for Hope. Thank you.
Is it Camp Hope or Haven for Hope? I'm sorry. I think it's Haven for Hope. Yeah, visit there. We actually looked at that. I think it's a very well organized encampment with very, good services. They're very connected to a local provider. I don't know what we need in terms of keeping people sheltered beyond the pandemic. Anna mentioned many people who've gotten hotels right now. We're working very hard to keep them there and to exit them into some kind of housing. Ideally, that may not be possible given the scope of the need. So I think Anna has a lot of experience from Portland, Oregon, working with there are real pros and cons to sort of sanctioned encampment areas, tent cities, if you will, in order to really be done well, that you have to put a lot of resources into them. And, the Built for Zero folks really advise us to put those resources into housing, into rental vouchers. Another thing we can do, I think, is to educate our landlords about how wonderful it is to rent to people who have a rent subsidy. It's a really good experience. They generally come well supported with case management if they need it, and your rent check is never late. So if people are worried about that in the current economy, I think we need to educate landlords that that's a good option. I think we want to focus on the housing and not so much the encampments. I think the opportunities that we're seeing in the pandemic is to actually reach people in encampments. We have a very interesting landscape, as you know, in Santa Fe, where people have chosen to live out of doors in arroyos, isolated. We've talked to homeless people who say, we won't go into shelter because we're actually protecting ourselves from the pandemic by living in this way. So that's slow work to build the relationships with those folks, to understand, what their ideal situation is and to kind of go with the grain. Not everybody would jump at going to a sanctioned encampment, which requires a fair amount of resources annually to run, which could be probably better spent on permanent supportive housing, in my opinion. But, we have to keep open given that we don't know what kind of numbers we're going to be looking at when the dust settles here.
Got it. So that was just a possible temporary idea, but obviously permanent housing is the goal, the ultimate goal.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's all I have. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? All right, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your being here tonight. Very informative. Would love to have those presentations if you get a chance just to study them more closely. It's a lot of information. I can tell you that we will continue this conversation and these presentations in the upcoming meetings. We've planned out some more things that I think will be very informative for figuring out how we put the policies in place and the funding to continue to do this work in the community. So again, thank you, everyone. We will move on now. Matters from staff. Jennifer, do you have anything tonight?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay, matters from the committee. All right, matters from the chair. Again, our next meeting is February 3rd, and we will continue this conversation then with additional presentations. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.